The shy waitress touched the deaf woman's hand, and what happened next left the entire restaurant speechless. Subscribe now, or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. Don't miss out. Let's dive in. The crystal chandeliers of Lumiere cast dancing shadows across marble floors as Saren Hayes adjusted her black uniform for the third time that evening. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nerves about serving Toronto's financial elite, but from the familiar weight of hiding who she really was. At 28, she had perfected the art of invisibility, moving through the restaurant like a ghost with a smile, carefully modulating her voice pitch and discreetly adjusting the hearing aids hidden beneath her dark hair. Table 7 needs their wine refilled, called Marcus, the head server, barely glancing up from his order pad. And try not to take too long with Mr. Chen tonight. He's already asked twice about the noise level in here. Saren nodded, gathering the bottle of Chateau d'Yquem that cost more than she made in 2 months. Atlas Chen. Even his name sounded like success, the kind of success that made people bow their heads and speak in reverent whispers. She'd been serving his usual table for 2 months now, and he'd never once looked at her as anything more than part of the furniture. The dining room hummed with quiet conversations of people who never worried about rent, about medical bills, about whether they'd have enough left over for groceries after paying for hearing aid batteries. Saren knew that world intimately. She'd lived in it once, in what felt like another lifetime. But tonight was different. Tonight, Atlas Chen wasn't alone. Across the restaurant, Saren watched a woman in her mid-60s sitting at table 7, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, her kind eyes scanning the room with obvious frustration. The woman's hands moved in small, precise gestures that made Saren's heart clench with recognition. She's signing, Saren realized. And she's upset. If you've ever felt invisible in a crowded room, you'll understand what happens next. Hit that like button if you're ready for a story about finding your voice. Most servers would have simply smiled and nodded, taken the wine order, and moved on. But Saren Hayes wasn't most servers. Before her world had collapsed 3 years ago, she had been Canada's youngest certified ASL interpreter, fluent in American Sign Language, Langue des Signes Québécoise, and International Sign. She had worked with Fortune 500 companies and government agencies, building bridges between hearing and deaf communities. Now she built bridges between tables and kitchen orders, but some instincts never died. Saren approached table 7 with careful steps, the expensive wine balanced perfectly in her hands. But instead of immediately addressing Atlas, she moved to stand where the older woman could see her clearly. Gently, respectfully, she tapped twice on the white tablecloth, a tactile cue she'd developed years ago for noisy environments. The woman looked up, surprised. "Good evening," Saren signed, her hands moving with practiced grace. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I noticed you seemed concerned. How may I help you?" The transformation on the woman's face was immediate and breathtaking. Her eyes widened with delight, then filled with what looked suspiciously like tears of relief. "Oh my goodness," the woman signed back, her movements quick and excited. "You signed beautifully. I was just frustrated because I wanted to compliment the chef on the salmon, but I wasn't sure how to communicate that to the staff." But this wasn't just any signing. Saren found herself responding in regional Canadian ASL, incorporating the subtle maritime influences she recognized in the woman's movements, signs that spoke of growing up deaf in 1960 seconds, Nova Scotia, of learning ASL in communities that blended French, English, and Mi'kmaq influences. "The chef would be honored to receive your compliments," Saren signed. "Would you like me to ask about his preparation methods? I believe he uses a traditional maritime technique with sea salt and dulse." The woman's hands flew to her mouth in amazement. "You know about maritime cooking? And you sign with such cultural awareness." Most people just point and gesture. Behind her, Saren was dimly aware that conversations at nearby tables had grown quieter, that other diners were watching this unprecedented exchange. But she was focused entirely on this woman who radiated the kind of dignity that came from a lifetime of being misunderstood and underestimated. "I grew up learning from a friend's grandmother who was from Cape Breton," Saren signed, which was partially true. "She taught me that signing isn't just about words, it's about respect for the culture and community." Atlas Chen was staring at both women with an expression Saren couldn't quite read. When the older woman noticed his confusion, she reached over and patted his hand affectionately. "Atlas, this wonderful young woman has been speaking with me in sign language," she said, her voice carrying the particular cadence of someone who learned to speak after losing their hearing. "She's been asking about my experience growing up deaf in Nova Scotia. When was the last time someone showed such genuine interest in deaf culture?" Atlas's gray eyes shifted to Saren with new intensity. "You speak sign language?" "A little," Saren said modestly, though her heart was racing. She'd been so caught up in the joy of genuine communication that she'd forgotten to be careful, forgotten that she was supposed to be just a waitress who knew nothing about accessibility or deaf culture. "More than a little," the older woman interjected with a knowing smile. "This young lady just used signing techniques I haven't seen since I was a child in Antigonish. She asked me about regional cooking methods, using signs that showed deep cultural knowledge." "You're very kind," Saren signed to her. "What's your name, if I may ask?" "Cordelia Chen," came the reply. "And you are?" "Saren Hayes," she said aloud, then fingerspelled it for Cordelia's benefit. Atlas was watching this exchange with growing fascination. "Saren, where did you learn to sign like that?" "I've worked with accessibility consultants for years, and I've never seen communication that and fluid." The question hit Saren like a physical blow. How could she explain that she'd once been one of those accessibility consultants? That she'd lost her hearing gradually over 18 months due to sudden sensorineural hearing loss? That the man who should have supported her had instead used her medical condition to destroy her career and steal her life's work? "I studied it in college," she said carefully. "Just something that interested me." But Cordelia was studying her with the sharp intelligence of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people's faces and body language for communication cues. "You have hearing aids," Cordelia signed discreetly, her movements small and directed only at Saren. "How long have you had hearing loss?" Saren's breath caught. She'd been so careful to hide her hearing aids, to speak at just the right volume, to never let anyone know about her condition. Employment discrimination against people with hearing disabilities was supposedly illegal, but she'd learned the hard way that laws and reality were very different things. 3 years, she signed back, equally discreetly. "Please don't tell him." Cordelia's expression softened with understanding, but also with something that looked like recognition. "You're not just a waitress, are you?" she signed. Before Saren could respond, Atlas cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, but I have to ask, are you two having a private conversation about me?" Cordelia laughed, a warm sound that made several other diners smile. "Saren was just telling me that she thinks you work too hard and don't eat enough vegetables." "I did not sign anything about vegetables," Saren protested, then caught herself smiling despite her nervousness. "How would you know what she signed?" Atlas asked, his tone sharpening slightly. "You don't speak sign language." "No," Atlas admitted, "but I know my mother's sense of humor, and judging by the way you're blushing, she said something designed to embarrass one or both of us." Saren felt heat creep up her neck. "She said you should meet more interesting people." "Did she?" Atlas glanced at his mother, who was trying very hard to look innocent. "And what do you think, Saren? Am I meeting interesting people?" The question felt loaded with meaning. Saren wasn't sure she wanted to unpack. Standing this close to him, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious reputation would indicate, could smell the subtle cologne that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "I think," Saren said carefully, "that you're fortunate to have a mother who cares so much about your happiness." "Smart answer." Cordelia signed approvingly. "What did she just say?" Atlas demanded. "She said you should try the dessert," Saren replied innocently. Atlas laughed despite himself. "You know, I'm beginning to think you two are conspiring against me. Comment below if you've ever had someone you trusted turn your vulnerability against you." Saren's about to teach us all about resilience. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of wine service and stolen conversations. Every time Saren returned to table 7, Cordelia drew her into brief exchanges about her experiences, her travels, her perspectives on how the hearing world treated deaf individuals. And every time, Atlas watched with growing curiosity and something that looked suspiciously like admiration. When they finally prepared to leave, Atlas paused at Saren's station. "Saren," he said quietly, "I run a technology company that focuses on accessibility solutions. What you did for my mother tonight, that level of cultural competency is rare. If you're ever interested in discussing your background, I'd love to hear more about your experience." Siren's heart hammered against her ribs. Atlas Chen ran Meridian Technologies. She knew the company well. They were the largest accessibility software developer in Canada, known for their innovative approaches to inclusive design. They were also the company that had recently announced a partnership with Sterling Accessibility Solutions. Sterling Accessibility Solutions. Donovan Sterling's company. The company built on her stolen work. "I appreciate the offer," she managed, "but I'm just a waitress. I don't think I'd have anything valuable to contribute to a company like yours." Atlas studied her face with uncomfortable intensity. "Siren, I've spent millions of dollars on accessibility consultants, and none of them have demonstrated the kind of authentic cultural understanding you showed tonight. Trust me when I say you're underestimating yourself." As mother and son headed toward the exit, Cordelia turned back and signed to Siren. "You're hiding your light under a bushel, dear one. Some gifts are too important to keep secret." Alone at her station, Siren felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. She'd been so careful for 3 years to stay invisible, to never draw attention to her background or her skills. One evening of genuine human connection, and she'd potentially exposed herself to the very industry that had rejected her. But what Atlas Chen didn't know was that this hearing waitress was hiding a secret that would destroy everything he thought he knew about his business partner. That night, in her cramped Scarborough apartment, Siren sat at her kitchen table staring at the business card. Atlas had quietly slipped her before leaving. Meridian Technologies, CEO Atlas Chen, his personal number written on the back. On her laptop screen was an article from that morning's Financial Post. Meridian Technologies partners with Sterling Accessibility Solutions for revolutionary government contract. The accompanying photo showed Atlas shaking hands with a man Siren hoped she'd never see again, Donovan. Sterling, her former mentor and the architect of her professional destruction. 3 years ago, Siren Hayes had been on top of the world. At 25, she was the youngest certified ASL interpreter in Canadian government history, fluent in multiple sign languages, and co-founder of what would become Sterling Accessibility Solutions. She and Donovan had started the company with a shared vision, creating genuine bridges between hearing and deaf communities, developing communication technologies that honored deaf culture rather than trying to fix it. Then came the diagnosis that changed everything. Sudden sensorineural hearing loss, a condition that struck without warning, gradually stealing her hearing over the course of 18 months. Instead of the support she'd expected from her business partner and mentor, Donovan had seen opportunity. "Siren, you have to understand the position this puts the company in." She could still hear his voice, recorded in a voicemail she'd saved as evidence she'd never been brave enough to use. "Our clients trust us to provide authentic deaf community representation. How can you represent a community you're not truly part of? You're not deaf enough to understand their needs, but you're too deaf now to represent hearing perspectives. It's an impossible situation." Thanks for watching. The systematic destruction had been masterful. Client meetings she was suddenly excluded from. Partnership agreements quietly rewritten to minimize her ownership stake. Patent applications for her communication methodologies filed under Donovan's name alone, with her contributions relegated to research assistance. The final blow had been the board meeting she wasn't invited to, where Donovan convinced their investors that Siren's hearing loss made her emotionally unstable and professionally unreliable. By the time she realized what was happening, her access to company accounts had been revoked, her key cards deactivated, and her name removed from all official documentation. "We're not firing you," Donovan had said with practiced sympathy. "We're offering you a generous severance package and excellent references. This is better than a messy legal battle that would only hurt your reputation further." Siren had been too shocked, too broken by the betrayal of someone she'd trusted, to fight back effectively. She'd taken the severance, signed the non-disclosure agreement, and disappeared into the anonymity of service industry work, convincing herself that maybe Donovan was right, maybe she didn't belong in either world anymore. But now, seeing Atlas Chen's business card, knowing that Donovan was about to profit from a government contract worth $50 million using methodologies he'd stolen from her, Siren felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Anger. Not the crushing despair that had defined her exile, but clean, energizing fury. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Saren, this is Atlas Chen. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from the restaurant's HR department. I wanted to thank you again for your kindness to my mother tonight. She hasn't stopped talking about you. Would you be free for coffee tomorrow? I have a feeling we have more to discuss than workplace etiquette." Saren stared at the message for a long time. Every instinct screamed at her to ignore it, to maintain the safe anonymity she'd built. But then she thought about Cordelia's words. Some gifts are too important to keep secret. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. "I'd like that," she typed back. "But Atlas, there are things about me you should know, things that might change your mind about that coffee." The response came immediately. "Then I guess tomorrow is going to be very interesting. Columbia campus, 2 p.m., front steps of Robart's library. And Saren? Nothing you tell me could be worse than spending another day wondering what I'm missing about someone clearly extraordinary." Meanwhile, across the city, Atlas Chen was having a conversation that would change everything. "Donovan, I had an interesting experience tonight," Atlas said into his phone, pacing his downtown condo with nervous energy. "I met someone who demonstrated signing techniques I've never seen before, cultural competency that made our accessibility consultations look like amateur hour." The pause on the other end of the line was telling. "Oh? Where did you meet this person?" Donovan Sterling's voice was carefully neutral, but Atlas caught the underlying tension. "At dinner with my mother. A server at Lumiere who spoke with Mom in sign language for nearly an hour, used regional Canadian ASL techniques, understood maritime deaf culture, showed the kind of authentic community connection you've been telling me is impossible to teach." Another pause. "Atlas, you know how carefully I've screened our communication specialists. Anyone claiming advanced ASL skills in Toronto, I'd probably know them. What was this person's name?" "Saren Hayes. Ever heard of her?" The silence that followed was deafening. Atlas could practically hear the gears turning in Donovan's head. Saren Hayes. That name sounds familiar. I might have encountered her at some point in academic circles. "Atlas, can I give you some advice? Be very careful about people who claim expertise they can't properly document. The deaf community is small and tight-knit. If this woman were truly qualified for the kind of work we do, she wouldn't be serving tables." The subtle dismissal in Donovan's tone made Atlas's jaw clench. Maybe she's serving tables because the right opportunities haven't been offered to her. Or maybe, Donovan said smoothly, she's serving tables because people in our industry have already evaluated her capabilities and found them insufficient. "Atlas, we're 3 days away from the government presentation. This isn't the time to get distracted by unvetted personnel." After ending the call, Atlas stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at Toronto's skyline. Something about Donovan's reaction bothered him. The man who normally championed giving opportunities to underrepresented individuals had been remarkably quick to dismiss someone based purely on their current employment status. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "That young woman tonight was special, Atlas. She didn't just speak sign language, she understood deaf culture in a way that takes years of genuine community engagement to develop." "Where did Donovan say he learned ASL?" Atlas frowned. It was a good question, and he realized he didn't actually know the answer. For someone who positioned himself as Canada's leading expert on deaf-hearing workplace integration, Donovan had always been remarkably vague about his own background and training. The next afternoon, Atlas found himself sitting on the steps of Robart's library, 2 coffee cups in hand, and a growing sense that his understanding of everything was about to shift dramatically. Saren approached with the kind of precise, measured steps he was beginning to recognize as someone who navigated the world using more than just hearing cues. In daylight, he could see the subtle hearing aids she'd been trying to hide, could notice the way she positioned herself to have clear sightlines for lip reading. "You came," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought once you had time to think about it, you'd realize that getting involved with your mother's waitress wasn't the kind of decision a CEO makes." Atlas studied her face, the intelligence behind her careful composure, the way she held herself like someone accustomed to being underestimated. "Saren, I need to ask you something directly. Last night, you demonstrated communication skills that I've been paying consultants hundreds of thousands of dollars to teach my team. Where did you really learn to sign like that?" Saren was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. When she finally looked up, Atlas saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected: steely determination. I learned because I had to, she said. Because 3 years ago, I started losing my hearing, and the person who should have supported me decided I was worth more to him destroyed than whole. The words hit Atlas like a physical blow. Who? Donovan Sterling. Atlas's coffee cup slipped from his nerveless fingers, hot liquid splashing across the stone steps. What? Donovan Sterling is my former business partner, Saren continued, her voice gaining strength. We founded Sterling Accessibility Solutions together. Every communication methodology he's been selling to you, every technique he claims to have developed, that's my work, Atlas, my research, my innovations, my connection to the deaf community. Share this story if you believe actions speak louder than credentials. Atlas is about to discover something that will shock him to his core. Atlas felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. That's impossible. Donovan founded Sterling Accessibility 5 years ago. I've seen the incorporation documents, the client testimonials, rewritten after my departure, Seren interrupted. Donovan is very thorough, Atlas. When he decided I was a liability rather than an asset, he didn't just fire me, he erased me. Partnership agreements were amended to show I was only ever an employee. Patent applications were altered to remove my name from inventor credits. Client testimonials were edited to remove any mention of my contributions. She pulled out her phone, opening a carefully organized folder. But Donovan made one mistake. He assumed that someone as broken as he'd made me would never fight back. So he didn't account for the backups I kept on personal devices, the photos documenting our work process, the emails where he asked me to explain technical specifications because he couldn't understand his own supposed innovations. Atlas took the phone with trembling hands, scrolling through images that rewrote everything he thought he knew about his business partner. Photos of Saren presenting at conferences, awards with her name on them, development notes in her handwriting, emails from Donovan asking for clarification on methodologies he would later claim as his own invention. My God, Atlas breathed. How long has this been going on? 3 years. Ever since I developed sudden hearing loss and became, in Donovan's words, too deaf to represent hearing perspectives, but not deaf enough to authentically understand the community. Saren's voice carried a bitterness that spoke of old wounds. He convinced our investors that my medical condition made me emotionally unstable and professionally unreliable. Atlas looked up from the phone, seeing Saren, really seeing her for the first time. Not a waitress who happened to know sign language, but a brilliant professional who'd been systematically destroyed by someone she'd trusted. Why didn't you fight this legally? With what resources? Donovan controlled our company accounts, had expensive lawyers, and most importantly, had convinced everyone in our industry that I was the problem. Saren smiled bitterly. Besides, I signed a non-disclosure agreement as part of my severance. Legally, I'm not supposed to be telling you any of this. Then why are you? Ah. Saren was quiet for a moment, then looked directly into his eyes. Because tomorrow, Donovan is going to present my stolen work to the Canadian government and receive $50 million for innovations he didn't create, using cultural knowledge he doesn't possess, claiming to serve a community he's never been part of. And because your mother spent an hour last night reminding me what it feels like to be seen and valued for who I really am. Atlas felt a cold rage building in his chest. Saren, if what you're telling me is true, it's all true. Then Donovan Sterling has committed fraud on a scale that could destroy not just his company, but mine as well. Atlas stood up, pacing in front of the library steps. Our partnership, the government contract, everything is built on stolen intellectual property. I know. This could cost me everything. My company's reputation, my relationship with the accessibility community, hundreds of millions in contracts. I know, Saren repeated quietly. That's why I almost didn't tell you. Atlas stopped pacing and looked at her. But you did tell me. Why? Saren stood up, meeting his gaze directly. Because last night, for the first time in 3 years, I remembered who I used to be. Someone who believed that doing the right thing mattered more than protecting yourself from consequences. Your mother helped me remember that some things are worth the risk. The absolute sincerity in her voice, the quiet courage it had taken to expose herself this way, hit Atlas with unexpected force. Here was someone who'd lost everything and was risking the little stability she'd rebuilt to prevent an injustice. Someone who could have stayed safely invisible but chose truth instead. "What do you need from me?" he asked quietly. Saren blinked in surprise. "What?" I said. "What do you need from me? If we're going to stop Donovan from profiting from your stolen work, what's our next move?" "Atlas, you don't understand what you're risking. This isn't just about money. Donovan will destroy your reputation. He's very good at making victims look like villains." "Let me worry about Donovan," Atlas said firmly. "The question is, are you ready to fight back?" For a moment, Saren looked stunned by his immediate support. Then Atlas saw something shift in her expression, the same steely determination she'd shown when signing with his mother, the quiet strength that had helped her survive 3 years of exile. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." But while Atlas was questioning his business partner, Saren was about to face a confrontation that would force her back into a world she'd been hiding from. That evening, Atlas called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. In the conference room of Meridian Technologies, surrounded by the team that had helped him build Canada's most successful accessibility company, he laid out everything Saren had revealed. "If these allegations are true," said Jennifer Wu, his chief technology officer, "we're not just talking about partnership fraud. We're talking about cultural appropriation on a massive scale. Donovan has been profiting from deaf culture and community knowledge he has no authentic connection to. More than that," added David Kim, head of legal affairs, "we've been positioning ourselves as authentic allies to the disability community while unknowingly perpetuating the very kind of exploitation we claim to oppose." Atlas nodded grimly. "I've been thinking about that all afternoon. How many times has Donovan spoken at conferences about the importance of authentic representation while literally stealing the work of someone from the community he claims to serve?" "What's our legal exposure?" Jennifer asked. "Potentially massive," David replied. "If the government discovers that our partnership was built on fraudulent intellectual property claims, we could face civil and criminal liability. Beyond that, our reputation in the accessibility space would be destroyed." "Good," Atlas said quietly. The room fell silent. "Sir?" Jennifer ventured. "I said good. If our reputation is built on a lie, then it deserves to be destroyed." Atlas stood up, moving to the whiteboard where they'd spent countless hours planning their partnership with Sterling Accessibility. "The question isn't how to protect ourselves. The question is how to make this right." David leaned forward. "Atlas, I understand the ethical implications, but we have fiduciary duties to our shareholders, contractual obligations." "We have a moral obligation," Atlas interrupted, "to the community we claim to serve. If we've been perpetuating harm while profiting from stolen work, then fixing that takes precedence over profit margins." He turned to face his team. "I want to offer Saren Hayes a consulting contract, full access to our development teams, complete authority to verify the authenticity of any methodologies we've licensed from Sterling Accessibility. If Donovan stole her work, I want documentation that will stand up in court." "And if she finds evidence of widespread theft?" Jennifer asked. "Then we go to the government before tomorrow's presentation and withdraw our partnership with Sterling Accessibility," Atlas said firmly. "We expose Donovan's fraud publicly, we return Saren's stolen intellectual property, and we help her rebuild the career he destroyed." The room was quiet as everyone processed the implications. "Atlas," David said carefully, "you're talking about potentially destroying a $50 million deal to help someone you met 2 days ago." "I'm talking about doing what's right," Atlas replied. "This isn't about Saren personally, though she deserves justice. This is about what kind of company we want to be. Do we want to be the kind of organization that profits from exploitation, or do we want to be worthy of the trust the disability community has placed in us?" Jennifer nodded slowly. "What do you need from us?" "I need you to help me give Saren Hayes her life back." 2 hours later, Saren stood in the lobby of Meridian Technologies, looking up at the gleaming corporate logo and feeling like she was stepping back into a world that had rejected her. But this time, she wasn't alone. Atlas met her at the security desk personally, guiding her through the building she'd once dreamed of working in. "Second thoughts?" he asked as they rode the elevator to the executive floor. "About 100 of them," Saren admitted. "Atlas, once we do this, there's no going back. Donovan will know exactly who provided the evidence against him." "Are you afraid of him?" Saren considered the question. "I'm afraid of being destroyed again. I'm afraid of believing that justice is possible and being proven wrong." but I'm more afraid of spending the rest of my life hiding from who I used to be. The elevator doors opened onto a floor buzzing with activity. Atlas's entire development team was working late, reviewing code, analyzing methodologies, preparing for what would either vindicate Saren's claims or prove them wrong. Saren. Jennifer Wu approached with a tablet in hand and excitement in her voice. We've been analyzing the communication protocols Donovan licensed to us. The underlying architecture is fascinating. Whoever designed this had an incredible understanding of both linguistic theory and practical accessibility needs. Saren felt a flutter of pride she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Thank you. Those protocols took me 2 years to develop. Jennifer's eyes widened. You designed these? All of them? Every algorithm, every user interface decision, every cultural consideration built into the communication framework. Saren accepted the tablet, scrolling through lines of code she'd written in her apartment, working 18-hour days fueled by passion and vision. This section here, the regional variation protocols, that was inspired by my work with maritime deaf communities. And this section handles the transition between formal and informal signing contexts. Donovan told us these were based on academic research from MIT. David Kim interjected. He said the original developer preferred to remain anonymous. The original developer, Saren said dryly, is standing right here, and she's been anything but anonymous. She's been erased. For the next 3 hours, Saren walked Atlas's team through every aspect of the methodologies Donovan had stolen. She showed them the original development notes, explained the cultural research that had informed each decision, demonstrated the signing techniques that had taken years of community engagement to master. But what shook Atlas most wasn't just the evidence of theft, it was watching Saren transform before his eyes. Gone was the careful, diminished woman who'd served his table with downcast eyes. In her place stood a brilliant professional who spoke with passion and authority about her life's work, who commanded the room's attention through sheer expertise. This was who she'd been before Donovan Sterling had tried to destroy her. This was who she could be again. The presentation is tomorrow morning, Atlas said as the team finally wrapped up their analysis. Donovan will be expecting to deliver these methodologies to the government as his own innovation. What are you planning to do? Saren asked. Atlas smiled, and there was something sharp in the expression. I'm planning to give him exactly what he deserves. But Donovan Sterling hadn't built his empire by letting challenges go unanswered. The next morning, the federal building's conference room was filled with government officials, disability rights advocates, and representatives from Canada's largest accessibility organizations. The contract being decided would shape accessibility policy for the next decade, influencing how government services were delivered to deaf and hearing-impaired citizens across the country. Donovan Sterling stood at the head of the room in an immaculate suit, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having been held accountable for his actions. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of practiced charm that made people instinctively trust him. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, what I'm about to show you represents 5 years of dedicated research into authentic deaf community communication preferences. My team has developed methodologies that don't just facilitate communication, they honor deaf culture. Atlas sat in the back of the room, his jaw clenched as he watched Donovan claim credit for every innovation Saren had painstakingly developed. Beside him, Saren was perfectly still, but Atlas could see the controlled fury in her eyes. The key breakthrough, Donovan continued, clicking to a slide showing Saren's regional variation protocols, was understanding that deaf communication varies significantly by geographic and cultural context. Our algorithms can adapt to everything from maritime ASL influences to indigenous signing traditions. Excuse me, Mr. Sterling. Atlas stood up, his voice cutting through the presentation. Could you explain how your team conducted research into indigenous signing traditions? Donovan's smile never wavered, but Atlas caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Extensive community engagement, Atlas. You know how important authentic consultation is to our process. Of course. And which indigenous communities did you work with specifically? The pause was barely perceptible. I'd have to consult our research notes for specific details. The important thing is that the methodologies work. The important thing, said a new voice from the back of the room, is that the methodologies were stolen. Every head in the room turned as Saren Hayes walked down the center aisle, moving with purpose and dignity. She was dressed in a professional suit Atlas had never seen before, her hearing aids visible and her head held high. Donovan's face went completely white. "Ladies and gentlemen," Seren said, her voice clear and strong, "my name is Dr. Seren Hayes. I'm the actual developer of every methodology Mr. Sterling has just presented to you." The room erupted in murmurs as Seren moved to the front, accepting a microphone from one of the government officials. 3 years ago, Donovan Sterling and I were business partners. I developed these communication protocols as part of our shared vision for authentic accessibility solutions. When I began experiencing hearing loss due to sudden sensory neural deafness, Mr. Sterling convinced me and our investors that my medical condition made me unfit to represent our company or our community. She looked directly at Donovan, who was standing frozen at the podium. "He didn't just fire me, ladies and gentlemen. He erased me. He rewrote our partnership agreements, altered patent applications, and removed my name from 3 years of research and development. Then he built a company worth millions of dollars on the foundation of my stolen work. This is ridiculous." Donovan finally found his voice. "I don't know what this woman hopes to accomplish, but I hope to accomplish justice," Seren interrupted. She moved to the presentation laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. "Mr. Sterling, you just presented my regional variation protocols. Perhaps you could explain to everyone here why the core algorithm includes a comment that reads SH. Remember to account for Cape Breton influences on maritime ASL development." The slide changed to show code with embedded comments that clearly identified Seren's initials and specific cultural knowledge that took years of community engagement to acquire. "Anyone can alter documentation," Donovan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're right," Seren agreed. "Anyone can alter documentation. But can anyone replicate this?" She moved to stand in front of the room's deaf interpreter, beginning to sign in the complex regional variations she'd demonstrated to Cordelia 2 nights earlier. But now she wasn't just communicating, she was teaching, showing the subtle cultural nuances that distinguished authentic community knowledge from academic theory. The interpreter's eyes widened with recognition and respect, as Seren demonstrated techniques that clearly came from years of genuine community engagement, not corporate research. "This is what authentic deaf community connection looks like," Seren said, her hands still moving as she spoke. "This is the knowledge that informed every protocol Mr. Sterling has claimed as his innovation. And this," she gestured to the interpreter's amazed expression, "is what genuine cultural competency produces." Atlas stood up again. "Mr. Sterling, I'd like to officially withdraw Meridian Technologies from our partnership agreement, effective immediately." "You can't do that," Donovan snapped. "We have contracts, binding agreements. We have agreements based on fraudulent misrepresentation of intellectual property," Atlas replied calmly. "Our legal team has spent the night reviewing every methodology you've licensed to us. Dr. Hayes has provided documentation proving that 87% of your so-called innovations were stolen from her work." The government official in charge of the procurement stood up. "Mr. Sterling, these are very serious allegations. I'm going to have to suspend this presentation pending a full investigation." But Seren wasn't finished. She looked around the room at the disability rights advocates, the accessibility professionals, the government officials who'd trusted Donovan to represent their community's interests. "I want you to understand what this means," she said quietly. "For 3 years, this man has been profiting from deaf culture while having no authentic connection to our community. He's spoken at conferences about the importance of genuine representation while literally stealing the work of someone who actually lives the experience he claims to understand." Her voice grew stronger. "He convinced everyone that my hearing loss made me unfit to serve the community I was born into. But the truth is, becoming deaf didn't diminish my understanding of accessibility, it deepened it. It gave me insights that someone who's never experienced disability could never authentically possess." She looked directly at Donovan. "You tried to destroy me because you knew I was the only person who could expose your fraud. You thought you could erase me completely, to make me disappear into the margins where disabled people are supposed to stay quiet and grateful for whatever scraps were given." The room was completely silent now. Everyone focused on this woman who'd found her voice after years of forced invisibility. "But I didn't disappear, Donovan. I survived. I rebuilt my life from nothing, and I never stopped being the person who created the work you stole. The only difference is that now I'm stronger. Now I know the difference between partnership that lifts people up and exploitation that tears them down." Saren turned to address the room. "The methodologies you've seen today, my methodologies, they work because they come from authentic community engagement. They honor deaf culture because they were developed by someone who lives in both worlds, who understands what it means to navigate society as a disabled person." She paused, looking around at faces that were beginning to show not just understanding but respect. "If you want to build truly accessible systems, you need authentically disabled voices in positions of leadership, not just consultation. You need people who understand that accessibility isn't charity, it's justice. And justice means that the people who create innovations get to benefit from them." The government official nodded slowly. "Dr. Hayes, would you be interested in presenting your methodologies yourself? It seems clear that we need to hear from the actual developer." Saren smiled, and Atlas saw the brilliant professional she'd always been shine through completely. "I'd be honored," she said. "But this time, I won't be presenting alone." She looked back at Atlas, who stood and moved to join her at the front of the room. "Atlas Chen of Meridian Technologies has offered to partner with me in developing accessible systems that truly serve our community's needs. Not as a client hiring a consultant, but as equal partners building something meaningful together." As Atlas took his place beside her, Saren felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for 3 years. She wasn't the same broken woman who'd fled in shame and terror. She was someone who'd been tested by betrayal and emerged stronger. Someone who'd learned that her differences weren't weaknesses to hide, but strengths to celebrate. Subscribe if you believe that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. Comment with your thoughts on how we can build truly inclusive communities. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't defined by others' limitations. The presentation that followed was unlike anything the government officials had seen. Saren demonstrated her methodologies with the passion of someone presenting their life's work, while Atlas showed how Meridian's resources could scale and implement those innovations across Canada's accessibility infrastructure. But more than technical excellence, what moved the room was witnessing authentic partnership in action. Atlas didn't just support Saren's expertise, he learned from it. When he wasn't sure about cultural nuances, he deferred to her knowledge. When she needed technical implementation details, he provided them seamlessly. This was what real collaboration looked like: two people with different strengths working together to create something neither could achieve alone. As for Donovan Sterling, he left the building facing investigations by multiple government agencies, civil lawsuits from former clients who discovered they'd been sold stolen innovations, and the complete collapse of the reputation he'd built on other people's work. 6 months later, Saren Hayes stood in the office of Hayes Chen Accessibility Solutions, watching the sunrise paint Toronto in shades of gold and possibility. The company she'd built with Atlas had grown faster than either of them had imagined, with contracts across North America and a team of developers who actually came from the communities they served. "Still can't believe it's real sometimes," Atlas said, appearing behind her with 2 cups of the terrible coffee she'd never learned to make properly. "The company or us?" Saren asked, accepting the coffee and settling into the comfortable rhythm of their morning routine. "Both. All of it." Atlas moved to stand beside her at the window. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't decided to bring my mother to dinner that night. You would have figured out Donovan was a fraud eventually. You're too ethical to partner with someone like him for long. Maybe, but I wouldn't have found you." Saren looked at this man who'd risked everything to fight for her, who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen to build her up rather than diminish her. Their relationship had grown naturally, from professional partnership to personal connection, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than just attraction. "Atlas," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He turned to face her fully, noting the serious tone. "What is it?" "Cordelia asked me to teach her some of the technical signs I've been developing for our new interfaces. She wants to be able to discuss our work more fluently." Atlas grinned. "That sounds like Mom, always wanting to be involved in everything. The thing is, I think she's planning to ask if she can join the company officially, as a consultant for senior accessibility issues. And I think it's a brilliant idea. Your mother has insights into aging with disability that could revolutionize how we approach accessibility for older adults." Atlas laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Are you asking my permission to hire my mother?" "I'm asking if you're ready to have your mother as a business partner." Saren, 6 months ago, you taught me that the best partnerships happen when people complement each other's strengths. Mom has strengths neither of us possess, and she clearly loves what we're building here. He moved closer, his hand finding hers. "Besides, she was the one who told me from the beginning that you were extraordinary. Maybe it's time I started listening to her business advice as much as her life advice." Saren felt her chest tighten with emotion. In the space of half a year, she'd gone from hiding her hearing aids and diminishing herself to leading a company that employed dozens of people, with a business partner who celebrated her expertise and a future mother-in-law who wanted to join their mission. "There's something else," Atlas said, his tone shifting to something that sounded almost nervous. "What?" "I've been thinking about what you said about partnership, about how the best relationships happen when people build each other up instead of tearing each other down." Saren felt her heart skip as Atlas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Atlas, I know it's only been 6 months. I know some people would say it's too fast, maybe even crazy." He dropped to one knee right there in their office, morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "But Saren, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He opened the box, revealing a ring that took her breath away, elegant without being ostentatious, beautiful without being showy. Exactly what she would have chosen for herself. "You've taught me what real partnership looks like, not just in business, but in life. You've shown me that love isn't about one person diminishing themselves to make the other feel bigger. It's about 2 people choosing to build something together that neither could create alone." Atlas looked up at her with absolute sincerity. "Saren Hayes, you're the most brilliant, courageous, compassionate person I've ever met. You've made me want to be worthy of the trust the community has placed in us. You've made me believe that doing the right thing isn't just ethical, it's profitable in all the ways that actually matter." His voice dropped to something intimate and tender. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that not all partnerships end in betrayal?" Saren stared down at this incredible man who'd seen her at her most broken and helped her become stronger than she'd ever been. The ring caught the morning light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls of the office they'd built together. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Atlas, yes to all of it." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Saren thought about how far she'd traveled from the scared, invisible woman serving tables and hiding her hearing aids. She'd learned that endings could be beginnings, that losing everything could teach you what was truly valuable, that the worst betrayal could lead to the most authentic love. Donovan Sterling had tried to erase her from existence, but instead he'd forced her to discover who she really was when everything else was stripped away. And who she was, it turned out, was someone strong enough to rebuild, brave enough to fight, and wise enough to recognize real partnership when she found it. Outside their office windows, Toronto hummed with morning energy, full of people starting their own new chapters, fighting their own battles, discovering their own strength. Somewhere in the city, other disabled professionals were building companies, other marginalized voices were finding platforms, other stolen innovations were being reclaimed by their rightful creators. But here, in this office filled with sunlight and possibility, Saren Hayes and Atlas Chen were just beginning to understand what it meant to have everything that truly mattered. Meaningful work, authentic partnership, and a love built on mutual respect rather than mutual need. Sometimes the voice that's been silenced is exactly the one the world needs to hear. Saren had learned that being different wasn't her weakness, it was her superpower. And with Atlas beside her, she was ready to change the world, one authentic partnership at a time. The future stretched out before them, bright with promise and rich with possibility. And for the first time in years, Saren Hayes was finally ready to embrace it all.